They didn't know his name. He appeared in the ash just as the towns began to fall, when soldiers marched through villages like wind through wheat, leaving homes broken, bodies buried, and children screaming into empty skies. The war took everything. It spared no face, no name, just left gaps in the world. And yet, he was untouched. No mud on his boots, no ash on his coat. He moved from ruin to ruin, never speaking, never rushing, just observing, choosing. It was the villagers who first whispered about him. A tall man in a long black coat, gloved hands, eyes hidden beneath the brim of a curved hat. They said he took only children, never adults, never siblings together, only one at a time. One night, near the outskirts of a collapsed church, a young boy was spotted sitting alone, clutching a blood-stained blanket. Before morning, the boy was gone. No tracks, no clues, just the faint scent of lavender where the soil had been disturbed. That same week, a girl vanished from a burnt farmhouse, then another from a refugee camp, then another, all within the same scorched region, all under the same quiet sky. No one reported these disappearances because there was no one left to report them. The children had already lost everyone. The man never forced them. He offered them a hand, and somehow they followed. But no one ever saw them again. Those who lived long enough to remember told stories of a palace buried in the mountains, a place too clean for war, too quiet for the living, a place built not to protect, but to contain. And the man who kept it? He never aged. He never smiled. He only watched. There were no screams, no locks, no chains, no blood. Each child taken by the man simply vanished. And yet, if they had known what awaited them beyond the tree line, perhaps they would have run, perhaps they would have screamed. But they didn't, because what greeted them at the end of that endless journey through fog and stone was not a cage, but a palace, a real one. Its gates were iron, tall and twisted like vines reaching toward the sky. The walls, made of white stone and polished wood, shimmered under the low winter sun. Ivy grew over statues of nameless angels. The air smelled of roses and cinnamon. A single bell echoed from somewhere inside, warm and clear. They entered not as prisoners, but as guests. The first to arrive was a girl no older than 9. Her shoes were worn through, her face gaunt. Yet the moment she stepped inside, a servant knelt before her and whispered, "Welcome, little one. You are safe now." She was given warm clothes, a room with velvet curtains and silk bedding, books, toys, music boxes that played lullabies. There were other children there too, boys and girls, all between the ages of 7 and 15, all calm, all quiet. No one cried, no one questioned. And always the man was nearby, watching from balconies, from doorways, from the garden path. He never touched, he never raised his voice, but his presence was iron. One of the boys, perhaps 12, once asked him, "Will we ever go back?" The man had simply replied, "There is no back. There is only forward, and forward begins here." The gates never opened again, and no child who entered was ever seen outside those walls. Not by anyone. Not ever. They were not prisoners. Not exactly, but they were not free either. From the moment the children stepped into the marble halls of the palace, a strange hush fell over them. It wasn't demanded, it wasn't forced, but somehow they all fell in line, speaking only in soft tones, moving carefully through the echoing corridors, always aware of who was watching and what. The man, the one who had brought them there, was never given a name. Some of the younger children called him Uncle, while the older ones simply referred to him as he. He rarely spoke. When he did, It was to remind them of the rules. There were 3. 1. No child may leave the palace grounds. 2. No child may speak of the world before. 3. No child may enter the locked wing. Beyond that, they were treated with care. Each had their own room, their own tutor, their own schedule. Meals were taken in silence beneath a grand chandelier shaped like a tree. Music echoed from unseen speakers. Sometimes they were read stories about faraway lands. Sometimes they were given drawing paper and asked to draw their dreams. But something was missing. They didn't laugh. They didn't argue. They didn't play. It was as if the moment they crossed the palace threshold, the chaos of childhood had been stripped away, replaced with something manufactured, peaceful, obedient, cold. One night, a small boy named Milo crept from his bed and wandered the halls barefoot. He paused before the locked wing, a corridor with no light, no warmth, and no sound. As he reached for the handle, a voice from behind said, "That door is not for you." The man stood there, calm and quiet. Milo never touched the door again. No one ever did. They were allowed outside, but only into the garden. It stretched like a dream beyond the back of the palace. Lush hedges, trimmed to perfection. Statues of children reading books, frozen mid-laughter. A fountain at the center that always flowed, even in winter. Flowers bloomed year-round, though no bees ever came. And the sky above was always a soft gray. Never rain, never sun, just muted calm. The garden had paths that led nowhere. Gravel trails that looped in perfect circles, framed by roses and iron benches. The children were told they could walk here whenever they pleased, as long as they stayed within the outer hedge wall, a wall too tall to climb and with no gate in sight. Some of them, especially the younger ones, accepted it as normal. They played hopscotch on the flagstones. They fed the fountain fish that never aged. They painted with colors that never faded. But the older ones, they noticed. They noticed how the birds in the trees above never moved their nests, how the leaves never fell, even in autumn, how the clouds never changed shape, and how the man, he, would often watch from a high tower window, arms folded behind his back, unmoving for hours, like a statue of his own. A girl named Lyra once asked, "Why do the trees never change?" No one answered. A week later, Lyra's paints were taken away. Her windows were shuttered. She was no longer seen in the garden. Her name was not spoken again. The silence deepened. The beauty around them began to feel unnatural, too symmetrical, too still, as if the garden wasn't growing at all, but holding its breath, waiting. And somewhere beneath the flowers, something old was watching back. His name was Jonas. He had been there longer than most, nearly 5 years by his own guess, though no one really knew how time moved inside the palace. He was one of the older children, maybe 15, maybe more. Tall, quiet, but with eyes that never stopped searching. He kept a notebook hidden under his bed, where he'd mark lines on the cover for every day he could remember. One morning during lessons, he did something none of the others dared. He asked a real question, out loud. "Why are we here?" The tutor, a pale man in a gray suit with fingernails too clean, froze mid-sentence. His eyes didn't blink. For a moment, the entire room went still. Even the ticking clock on the far wall seemed to pause. Then he closed the book and whispered, "Jonas, come with me." The other children watched as he left. Jonas didn't return for dinner, or breakfast, or the day after that. The only thing found in his room was the notebook, pages torn out, cover scorched. But the marks he had scratched into the wood under his bed remained, 7. That's how many days he had counted. Or at least, that's where the marks stopped. Whispers began again, quiet ones, children speaking in corners, glancing over shoulders, sleeping less. The silence that once protected them now felt more like a shroud. Something heavy, something dangerous. The man, he, never addressed it. But he was seen more often in the halls now, watching, listening. And the locked wing, it started humming at night, low, like a breath behind stone. Some said they heard crying, others said it was music. No one dared get close. Jonas had asked a question, and the palace had answered. It began with a letter, not from the outside world, because no post reached the palace, but a child, a girl of about 11 named Solia, had written one anyway. She had taken a scrap of paper from the library, scrawled something in hurried, uneven handwriting, and slipped it under the old cellar door. Why she chose that place, no one knew. But that night, the wind outside changed. A week later, for the first time in years, a stranger arrived. He didn't come in a black coat or move like fog. He came in a police uniform, stiff, clean, bearing the seal of a broken city that had once been a capital. His name was Inspector Anton Kalmov, and he came with questions, not weapons. The children were not told of his arrival. He was led through a different path, away from the gardens, through the locked iron gate they never knew existed. He met with the man at the top of the tower, behind heavy doors and mirrored walls. Their conversation was private, but tense. Later, the inspector was given a tour. He saw the library, the bedrooms, the kitchen. He was served tea by a maid with glassy eyes who never blinked. "Where are their guardians?" he asked. "They have none," the man replied softly. "They are under my care, all of them." The inspector pressed further. "Are they prisoners?" "They are protected." When he asked to speak to one of the children alone, the man smiled gently. "There is no need. They are content." But still, the inspector stayed the night. Alone, he walked the gardens. He examined the walls. He counted the rooms. He tried to find an exit. He did not. And when he left, he took nothing. No child, no proof, only questions. When Inspector Kalmov returned to the city, his report was brief. Too brief. He wrote that he had visited an estate tucked between abandoned ranges, a facility for displaced minors, run by a private caretaker. He noted the hygiene standards were exceptional. The children were clean, well-fed, quiet. The environment peaceful, orderly. There were no signs of abuse, no signs of trauma, no reason for removal. Case closed. That's what the seal read. But those who read between the lines noticed something else, something missing. There were no names, no birth records, no list of wards, no official licensing for guardianship, no trace of where the children had come from or who had approved the man's authority. And still, no action was taken. Because there was something else Kalmov's report confirmed, though no one ever said it aloud. All the children were orphans. Every last one of them. Their parents had been killed in the early months of the war. Bombings, gas, executions, starvation. Entire villages had vanished. These children had no relatives. No one was looking for them. No one even knew they existed, which meant no one could claim them. And perhaps that's what unsettled Kalmov the most. Not what he saw in that palace, but what he didn't. No chaos, no crying, no childhood, just silence. When he tried to revisit 3 months later, the path was gone. His maps showed forest where there had once been road. His horses refused to enter the hills. Locals claimed they had never heard of any estate. The inspector stopped asking questions, and the file was moved to a drawer marked unresolvable. A drawer that would later be found, inside the black ledger. They were taught things, but not the kind of things that belonged to any school. There were no dates, no maps, no wars, no history, no future, no nations. The children were taught music, but only soft, wordless melodies. They were taught literature, but the books had no authors. They studied philosophy, but only questions that had no answers. And always, no clocks. Time didn't pass inside the palace the way it did outside. Days blurred into one another. Lessons started and ended with no bells, no signals, just the quiet arrival of a tutor and their quiet departure. Elia, now 14, once tried to count the days on her fingers. She stopped after 50. Her fingers had grown longer. Milo, younger than her, said he had a dream where the sky outside cracked like glass, and behind it was only more sky, a loop like the garden paths. The others listened in silence, not because they were afraid, but because they didn't know how to respond. Dreams were never discussed. Jonas's notebook was now passed around in secret. Some pages had drawings of the garden, of the halls, of the man. Others had lists, food they'd eaten, words they weren't allowed to say, doors they weren't allowed to open. But the last page was always left blank. Like Jonas had known it wouldn't end the way stories do. One night, a new child arrived, a boy with sand in his hair and bandages on his hands. The older kids watched from behind their curtains. He didn't cry when they gave him his room. He didn't speak when the man came to his bedside. He just whispered one word under his breath, home. And the palace swallowed another name whole. At the far end of the east wing, past the linen halls and the staircase that led nowhere, stood a door that no child ever touched. Not because it was forbidden, but because it felt alive. It was carved from dark wood, almost black, and sealed with 4 iron locks. But it was the air around it that made the children afraid. Not heavy, not cold, but wrong. Like standing near the mouth of something enormous, something sleeping. And sometimes, late at night, it breathed. That's what Elia swore. She had been walking the halls one evening, hoping to find something to distract her from the hum inside her head. As she passed the locked door, the flame of her candle shivered, not flickered, but recoiled, as if pulled by some invisible breath. She never went near it again. Others had stories too. Lyra once said she heard voices behind the door, not whispers, but lullabies, the same melody the music boxes played. Milo said he dreamed there was a mirror behind it, but when he looked into it, he didn't have a face. No one told the man, because by now the children understood. He already knew. He would often pause near the door during his nightly walks. His hand would hover over the handle, never touching, just acknowledging. Like a ritual, like respect. And on the days when a new child arrived, the door would hum louder. Not angry, not mournful, just waiting. Some said it was the source of the silence. Others said it was where the outside world had been buried. Jonas, in one of his torn pages, wrote only this: "We are not alone here. Something else remembers us." He wasn't supposed to be out that late. But Milo had a habit of wandering. He moved like a shadow, not out of mischief, but because something inside him never settled. While the other children drifted between routines like clockwork, Milo searched, not for escape, not even for answers, just a crack in the calm. That night, he slipped through the kitchen corridor, past the unused stairwell and into the east garden. It was always dim there, lit only by moonlight and the soft glow of gas lamps that never flickered. And that's when he found it. Not a door, not a gate, but a wall. It rose far behind the hedges where the gravel path abruptly ended. Tall, black stone that didn't match the rest of the palace. No ivy, no statues, no beauty, just a barrier, unbroken, seamless. It hadn't been there before. He reached out and touched it. Cold, dry, almost hollow. And then he heard it. Not a voice, not a sound, but a feeling. A pulse in his fingertips. Like the wall was listening back. He took a step back. Behind him, someone whispered, "Don't wake it." Milo turned. No one there. He ran. The next morning, the east garden was closed for maintenance, the gravel path gone, the hedges trimmed so tightly they looked like a wall themselves. No one else ever found the black stone again. But Milo changed after that. He grew quieter, more withdrawn. He stopped drawing, stopped eating. The others noticed but said nothing, not because they didn't care, but because they understood. This place wasn't just hiding them from the world, it was hiding something else from them. And Milo had gotten too close. Names mattered once. When the children first arrived, they clung to them like the last threads of a world they barely remembered. Some whispered their names before sleep. Others carved them into the underside of their beds, or wrote them into the margins of borrowed books. But names began to slip, not all at once, but gradually, like candlelight fading in fog. The tutors began referring to the children by numbers, not cruelly, just casually. "Number 8, please read." "Number 15, come forward." Some children laughed the first time, thinking it a game, but the man never corrected it. He never used names. Even in kindness, he addressed them like strangers he'd always known, with soft tones, gentle nods, but never the intimacy of identity. Elia once tried to gather the others to write down all their names. She believed if they remembered them, they could remember more, who they were, where they came from, the lives before the palace. She only managed 12. Jonas, Lara, Milo, Solya, and 8 others whose handwriting looked uncertain, like they weren't sure if the name was truly theirs. Within a week, the list was gone. She had hidden it under her pillow. One morning, it simply wasn't there. She asked the others. No one had seen it. No one even spoke of it. It was as if the names themselves had decided to leave. That night, Elia found her reflection in the mirror had softened, like she wasn't fading, but being reshaped, not erased, rewritten. She pressed her hands against her chest and whispered her name over and over. But the more she said it, the less it sounded real. And behind her, in the mirror, the door in the east wing stood open, just for a breath. Then gone. His name was Samir, though by then no one called him that. He had been in the palace longer than most, tall, nearly 17 now. Sharp eyes, sharper mind. Unlike the others, he didn't surrender to the silence. He observed it, learned its patterns, counted the steps of the servants, timed the hum of the east wing, memorized the garden's outer hedge. And he never forgot who he was. For years, he played the part, obedient, quiet, thoughtful. But behind the stillness, he was always planning, always waiting. And one night, he ran. It was nearly dawn. Fog clung to the ground like breath frozen in place. The gates were locked, but Samir had found a service tunnel weeks before, small, half-covered in vines, near the old pump house. It hadn't been used in years. He squeezed through. The air outside was colder than he remembered, colder than anything inside the palace. Trees here were wild, untrimmed, creaking in the wind. The sky, vast, endless, shifting, made him dizzy. He ran. Down the slope, past burned trees and dry rivers, past silence, past memory, until he reached the road and heard the sound. A car. He didn't recognize it at first. The roar of the engine, the blur of motion, the glare of headlights. It hit him like a scream. He collapsed onto the dirt, covered his ears, gasped for breath. A farmer found him there, trembling. When the man asked his name, Samir didn't speak. When he was taken to town, shown the lights, the crowds, the sound, Samir screamed. He couldn't survive it. The world was too fast, too bright, too real, and within 2 days, he was gone again. Returned, carried back to the palace gates by the same man in the same black coat. They saw him before the bell rang. It was Milo who looked out the eastern window and whispered, "He's back." And in the courtyard below, lit by a sky bruised with clouds, stood the man in black. And beside him, Samir, silent, pale, changed. He didn't look injured, not physically, but his eyes. They no longer searched. They stared, as if the world outside had burned away something behind them. The other children watched from behind curtains and half-closed doors. No one moved. No one spoke. Samir was led through the front gate, down the marble hall, and back to his room. No fanfare, no punishment, no explanations. The man said nothing to the staff. The tutors didn't ask. And Samir? He didn't speak for 3 days. On the 4th day, he walked into the common room and sat by the fireplace. His fingers trembled as he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a crumpled bus ticket. The ink was smeared, the paper torn, but the letters were still visible. A city name, a place none of the children had ever heard of, a place that sounded possible. Elia sat beside him. "Was it real?" she asked. He nodded. "Did it hurt?" He didn't answer. Later that night, the ticket was gone. No one took it. No one claimed it. It was simply missing. And after that, Samir changed the way he moved. He no longer wandered. He no longer watched. He sat. He listened. He followed orders without hesitation. As if the outside world had broken something the palace needed intact. The others began to understand. They weren't here because the man had stolen them. They were here because the world had nowhere else for them to go. At the top of the west wing, past a corridor lined with frosted windows, there was a room none of the children had ever entered before. Until one day, the door was open. No one knew who opened it. No one was told to go inside. But Elia was the first to step through, followed by Lyra, then Milo. Their footsteps echoed across the polished floor like whispers bouncing off stone. The room was vast, circular, domed with a glass ceiling that let in a pale, milk-colored light. And on every wall, spaced evenly like soldiers, hung portraits. Each one was of a child, painted in oils, aged in cracks, lifelike enough to make them pause. The eyes followed. The smiles were soft. The backgrounds were always the same. A gray curtain, a single chair, a still expression. Some of the faces looked familiar, not entirely, not clearly, but enough to stir something just beneath the surface. Milo whispered, "That's Samir." Lyra pointed at another. "That looks like Jonas." There were hundreds of them, lining the walls, stacked in rows up to the ceiling. Boys and girls, some smiling, some blank, some looking just the slightest bit afraid. But one wall stood empty. Just a large golden frame, waiting. No canvas, no name. And beside it, leaning against the wall, was a paintbrush, clean, unused. Behind them, the man's voice broke the silence. "You mustn't stay here." The children turned. He stood in the doorway, face unreadable, voice gentle. "It's not ready yet." They backed away, slowly, heartbeats in their throats. He didn't stop them from leaving. But that night, the door was locked again. And in the morning, the unfinished portrait was gone. Only the frame remained, still empty, still waiting. The palace was silent. That was its law. But silence, true silence, has weight. And sometimes, when everything else fell still, after the lessons had ended, the lights had dimmed, and even the wind in the trees had gone quiet, the children heard something moving beneath the floors. At first, they thought it was just old pipes, maybe the shifting of stone, the settling of foundations. But the longer they listened, the more they realized it had rhythm. Scrape. Pause. Scrape again. It didn't come from one place. It traveled, room to room, like footsteps dragging over wood, sometimes light, sometimes heavy, always deliberate. Milo was the first to follow it. He pressed his ear to the library floor and whispered, "It's walking." Elia tried to track the pattern on paper. "It circles," she said, "but it always returns to the east wing." Then, one night, the sound stopped. Gone. Not replaced by silence, but by something worse. Breathing. Not the kind from lungs or throats. It came through the walls, slow, deep, hollow. The way stone might breathe if it had lungs, the way something enormous might sleep behind layers of plaster and marble. Lyra asked if it might be the man, but Milo shook his head. No, it's older than him. And they all knew what he meant. Whatever moved beneath the palace wasn't walking halls. It was walking under them. It wasn't watching the children. It was waiting for them to forget they were being watched. And as the days passed, fewer children walked alone. More doors stayed closed. The air grew heavier. And once, just once, the floorboards near the east stairwell cracked open like ribs, then healed before sunrise. Her name was Lyra, and she remembered more than she was supposed to. Not just her name, not just her age, but her mother's voice, her father's hands, the shape of her village before the fire swallowed it. She remembered the sound of people laughing around a table. She remembered the color of real sunlight on her face, and she remembered being taken. Not gently, not with a smile. She remembered screaming. She remembered the man's cold grip, the way the forest swallowed her cries, the way the palace had appeared only after her tears stopped. Everyone else seemed to forget, but not Lyra. She hid her memories behind silence, behind a calm face, good behavior, and quiet hands, but inside she guarded them like fire in her chest, afraid to speak them out loud, afraid they'd vanish forever. Then one night, she whispered them to Elia. They sat under the garden tree where the roses never wilted, and she spoke every memory she could hold. Elia didn't believe her at first. "I think we were always here," she said. "This is the only home I know." But Lyra shook her head. "No, this place took that from us. It's still taking." Later that night, Lyra found a new drawing under her pillow. It was of her, standing outside the palace gates, barefoot in snow, screaming. No one had seen her draw it. No one admitted placing it. The next morning, the roses around the tree were gone, dug up, the earth blackened. The gardener didn't speak for 3 days. And the man? He stopped watching from the tower. Instead, he walked the halls, as if something inside the walls had stirred, as if Lyra's memories had woken it. By now, the children knew the palace was changing. Rooms they had known for years suddenly weren't where they'd always been. Doors that led to the library opened into hallways they didn't recognize. Mirrors reflected corridors that shouldn't exist. The layout, once symmetrical and easy to memorize, had begun to bend in on itself, like a maze that breathed. But what appeared that morning should not have been possible. A hallway, long, narrow, wrapped in deep red wallpaper. Milo found it first, just past the second-floor study. It wasn't there the day before. He was sure. He had walked those halls countless times, and yet, when he reached for the bookcase that usually marked the wall's end, his hand passed right through, into something else. The hallway was quiet, too quiet. No breeze, no footstep echo, no distant music from the phonographs, just the slow, low thud of his heartbeat as he took his first step. The paintings on the walls were different here. They weren't of people. They were of doors, hundreds of them, all closed, some cracked. One of them had his own face behind it, eyes wide, mouth open like he was screaming. He ran. He didn't tell the others at first, but that night, when he went back, the hallway was gone, replaced by solid stone. And behind that wall, he swore he heard whispers in his own voice, saying things he'd never said, things he'd only thought. The palace wasn't a prison. It was a mirror. And it was starting to reflect them back. Wrong. Elia found drawings in her notebook she didn't remember making. Lyra swore her reflection smiled before she did. And the man? He began locking his own door at night. Not to keep the children out, but to keep something else in. Elia woke screaming. Not because of a nightmare, but because she remembered something that wasn't hers. She had been running through a burning city, boots too big, her hands gripping the wrist of a boy she didn't recognize. Air choked with ash, people shouting in a language she didn't speak, soldiers in masks, a cathedral crumbling behind her. And then, the palace gates. When she sat up in bed, her palms were black with soot, real soot. The sheets were scorched. Milo had a dream that same night, a dirt road, a farmhouse, a baby crying in a cellar. Then silence. Forever silence. Lyra remembered a hospital, the smell of disinfectant, the weight of a soldier's dog tags in her tiny hand. One by one, the children began remembering lives they had never lived. Some wept, some went mute. Others scratched messages into the floorboards. Names, cities, dates, warnings. A dozen memories, a dozen different lives, but all of them ended the same way, in war. And after the war, the man. He had taken them from ruin. Not to hurt them, not even to save them, but to preserve them, like insects in amber, frozen in perfection, unchanging. Because the outside world had chewed them up and spit out their broken, shaking bodies. And here, in this place, this gilded mausoleum, they would never break again. But they weren't healing. They were forgetting who they'd been. The palace hadn't erased their pain. It had only replaced it with stillness, and something in the walls fed on that stillness. Jonas had written once, "This place doesn't protect us from the world. It protects the world from what we've become." And now the children were starting to remember why they found his room unlocked. That had never happened before. The man who had watched them from towers, whispered through halls, and smiled without warmth, was gone. His chambers were wide, dark, and almost bare. No warmth, no color, just books stacked to the ceiling and a single mirror framed in black oak. The children stepped in one by one, breath held. And in the mirror, they saw each other. Not as they were, but as they might have been, Jonas in a soldier's uniform, Ilya clutching her mother's hand, Lyra wrapped in a funeral shawl, standing before a grave, Milo as a street child, dirty-faced, eyes too wise for his age. Each child saw a life that had been interrupted, a world that had spat them out and left them to the wind. The mirror didn't lie. It revealed what was taken. And then they saw him, the man, standing behind them in the reflection. But when they turned, no one was there. His voice came from nowhere. You were all broken when I found you. The world would have swallowed you whole. I gave you peace. I gave you silence. I gave you a life without fear. Lyra stepped toward the mirror, voice shaking. You took our pain, but also our names. A pause. Then, yes. Because names remember pain, and pain remembers war, and war remembers the truth. The mirror rippled like water. One by one, the children stepped back, not because they were afraid, but because they understood now. This wasn't a sanctuary, it was a burial. Of their past, of their rage, of the part of them that would never stop screaming, and they had to decide, stay buried, or remember. The next morning, the children gathered in the main hall. Not by instruction, not out of fear, but because something inside each of them had shifted. Something quiet and heavy, like the final breath before a long silence. The man was nowhere to be found. His voice no longer echoed through the walls. The east wing door, the one that had once breathed, stood wide open, and behind it, a stairwell leading down into blackness. No one spoke. No one cried. They had remembered too much now to be afraid. Lyra went first, then Milo, then Alia. The others followed. The staircase spiraled deep, the air growing colder with each step. The walls were carved with names, names the children began to recognize not from the palace, but from their own forgotten lives. Siblings, mothers, towns, villages. Each name was a grave. At the bottom, they found a chamber, stone walls lit by the flicker of an unseen fire, and in the center, a door. But not one to open, not one to pass through. A door made of mirrors, hundreds of them, fractured, stitched together, some fogged, some shattered. In each, the children saw who they had been, and who they had become. And in the middle of all those reflections stood the man. Older now, tired. He didn't speak. He simply stepped aside and disappeared into the glass. Forever. The children stood in silence, not broken, not afraid, just free. But when they climbed the stairs back to the main hall, the palace was no longer the same. The ceilings cracked, the doors rotted, the gardens withered, and the front gate gone. There was no outside, just white mist stretching forever. The palace had never been a place. It had always been a question. And the answer was this. What becomes of children who no longer belong to the world and can never return to it? They weren't trapped. They were protected from everything, even themselves.